What's good with the YouTube of Convicts Perspective? It's your boy, Big Flaco. Sliding through, smashing through, coming through with my co-host, Big Senor Rojo, with a little bit of energy, man. And today we got an interesting topic for you guys, man. We're going to do a discussion. We found a very interesting article from the New York Times from 1973, which discusses the current conflict at that time about the Nuestra Familia and Mexican Mafia. And so what we find interesting about this article is it was written during this time era. So you're going to see a little bit of discrepancies, and you're going to see a little bit of things that you may have heard different over the years, but this is actually an article during that time. So we're going to read it, and then we're going to break down our perspective of it afterwards.
Yeah, and it's a trip, man, because this is happening in Soledad. This the focus of this article, Soledad, California, but it made news all the way in New York to the biggest newspaper in the world, the New York Times. You know what I mean? So you can tell there was obviously a lot going on, man. But we'll get right into it. This is from the New York Times. This article is from May of 1973, May 13th to be exact. Soledad, California, May 13th. 80 Mexican-American convicts at Soledad State Prison were watching a Spanish-language movie, La Mascadera, The Mask, recently when scuffling, curses, and screams of pain suddenly drowned out the film's dialogue. When the lights were turned on in the prison gymnasium and guards began herding the inmates up against the wall, 3 men lay sprawled across the wooden benches down front, their gray denim shirts soaked with blood. One, Gerald Ramos, 25 years old, was near death with more than 20 stab wounds from crudely fashioned but razor-sharp shivs that lay nearby. It's the Mexican Mafia and the new family, that's what they called it, at it again. We know it, and every inmate knows it, but it would be worth a convict's life to even admit that, said Soledad's administrator, George Baker. Killings, knifings, terrorism, and torture extending throughout the California penal system's 12 prisons and 16 work camps have become almost commonplace in a vicious struggle for power being waged by the 2 rival Mexican-American based gangs. 34 killings in a year. Officials of the State Department of Corrections blame the, I've never seen this word before, internecine, Chicano warfare for at least half of the 34 convict killings, as well as numerous knifings and beatings that have occurred in the last year among the 21,000 inmates of California's prisons. In one 17-day period at Soledad, where 90% of the inmates are hard-time repeaters, 6 inmates were killed. The Mexican Mafia is a nickname given to the organization calling itself El Mexicano Encarcelado, the imprisoned Mexican, whose members prefer to call themselves MA. It has turned to use of hired killers in fighting off the challenge of the newer and smaller, but no less vicious new family, whose original name was La Nuestra Familia, our family. The Mexican Mafia, which, this is how it's written, peers no relationship to the Mafia of Sicilian origin, gives contracts for the execution of its enemies inside and outside of prison to another prison group, the Aryan Brotherhood. The Brotherhood is a neo-Nazi and young toughs recruited largely from the motorcycle gangs of California's urban slums. A mafia leader locked in the deepest and darkest hole of solitary confinement is able to order the killing of a man in another prison in Los Angeles and even in Tijuana, said a former one-time Folsom inmate. Recently, the new family has been striking back, not only at the mafiosos, but at its Aryan Brotherhood confederates. 2 weeks ago in the recreation yard of San Quentin, 6 convicts identified as Aryan brothers were injured in a brawl with knives and baseball bats, in which officials described as a fresh outbreak of the continuing power struggle. The insignia used by these gangs is tattoos. The Mexican Mafia and the new family each have its own identifying insignia, which any member wears as tattoos. For the Mafia, it is an eagle trolled on a cactus plant, demiring a snake. For the new family, it is the flowing letters NF with a star. At stake in the current struggle is the longtime power of the Mexican mafia in dominating most of the prison rackets. The most lucrative of these rackets is the smuggling and sale of narcotics, but also included are gambling, 3-for-1 loan sharking, the auctioning off of youthful new arrivals to,
You know what?
I can't say that, but auctioning off another person, and the corruption of boss cons and guards to obtain choice jobs assignment and other favors. What's up, Flaco?
No, I'm on the same page as you. We can't say that word.
So, ladies and gentlemen, some of these words, unfortunately, we're not allowed to say, but you get the picture of what happens to a nice young man that comes into jail, right? Okay.
Turns into Danny.
YouTube's really been honest lately. They've blocked, we've had a bunch of videos that we had made for you guys blocked for reasons that Flaco or myself are unable to figure out. We've gone over the videos. One of them didn't even have one swear word, no SH word, no ASS even. And I find it, I'm bewildered, man, because we've had some really great content that we haven't been able to provide for you guys because of some.
But it is on the members only page.
Yeah, we put one on, Flaco put one on the members only page for you guys this morning. I was going to do the same thing when I woke up. Flaco handled that stuff like a savage. Anyway, let's go back to this article, but hey, we apologize. We try to bring you raw content and say it how it's written, say it how we feel. Unfortunately, we're getting short-stopped on that, man, and it's not our fault, man, because you know me and Flaco, Gunner, everybody we associate with keeps it 100% authentic. You know what I mean? I'm going to continue. The guards know they really can't control the inmates, and they relinquish their authority to the boss cons, the middlemen who run the cell blocks and are easily intimidated by the mafia, says Carl Rucker, who spent nearly 20 of his 33 years in one California penal institution after another. Once a guard does a favor for a boss con, he's on the convict's payroll, and the next thing you know, he's bringing dope from the outside or turning a blind eye to the knifings and beatings. The new family, seeking a share of the loot, is also challenging the Mexican mafia's growing power outside of prison. In crowded barrios in Los Angeles and other cities where mafia members released from prison have moved to take over narcotics trades and a variety of protection rackets that prey on businessmen and women. Bodies dumped at the border. Jake Gunn, associate warden of Folsom Prison, conceded that for the first time in California, prison-bred crime syndicates are reaching out onto the streets. The Mexican mafia's reach has extended across the Mexican border to the La Playa section of Tijuana, where a fugitive killer and former leader of the Mexican mafia in Folsom, Henry Gamboon Buckley, 52 years old, a Chicano despite his name,
Never heard of him.
has established himself. Nor have I. Buckley is described by the Los Angeles police as a key figure in the Mexican mafia who is aware of everything that goes on inside every California prison. He is said to be working with two Mexican brothers, Juan and Roberto Hernandez, to gain control of the drug traffic into California. That's what we say about them borders right there. Several killings in which the bodies have been dumped on the American side of the border at night have marked the Mexican mafia's Tijuana activities. To join the Mexican mafia, a convict must have a Mexican background and at least made one hit, either a killing or a knifing. Candidates are voted on not only by the Mexican mafia of the prison where he is held, but also by members in prisons throughout the state. Some former convicts say that the intelligence networks of the two organizations extends beyond the prison walls to keep a close track of paroled convicts and to claim a share of their earnings. The organizations are also said to seek to infiltrate responsible Mexican American civic organizations. The size of the two organizations is difficult to determine because many Mexican Americans who have never taken the blood oath are nevertheless held in thrall by the organization's leaders and take orders from them. Warden Luke S. Nelson of San Quentin said, "The Chicano inmate gets pressure from both sides, the Mexican mafia and the new family. And he really has no way to escape because if he tries to stay neutral, he's in double trouble." One former convict insisted that he knew at least one incident at the dual vocational facility at Tracy where a young Chicano, refusing to align himself with either faction, was castrated in the prison workshop as an object lesson to others. Some women members. A former Mafia member said he was once given the name of some 250 members, including some women convicts in various penal institutions. Other estimates put the Mafia's membership near 500, and the new family's rolls at perhaps half that number. According to William Curtis, investigator for the Monterey County Prosecutor's Office, who has been involved in the investigation of several Mexican Mafia new family conflicts at Soledad, the Mafia has caudillos, or chieftains, in each prison wielding almost absolute power, while the new family operates under committee leadership. Seems like the roles have reversed. The two underground gangs have no interest whatsoever in prison reform or the convicts' welfare. The more repressive conditions are, the greater their influence over inmates. They are hostile generally to Black inmates and their problems. Raymond Procunier, director of,
Procunier.
say again?
I think that's Procunier. He's the
Oh
one
yeah,
that
hey, no matter how I pronounce it in the comments, they're gonna tear me up anyway. So I'll just they be on me, bro. It's like whatever.
Hey, man,
I try, man.
that's that
You
famous
pronounce
case,
this shit.
the people versus, remember, that's a famous case that we had to study. Remember that?
I don't
That's when,
recall.
yeah, that's when the changes happened with administration segregation at that time. in the
I
70s.
do recall. All right, okay. Whatever his name is, director of the California Department of Corrections, who has been directed. Excuse me, guys. Okay, I'm gonna get it together.
It's Monday.
Director, just another man. All right, direct. All right, come on, Flacco. Director of the California
This is gonna
Department
be our
of
Congress perspective
Corrections.
blooper reel.
This is all Flacco's fault, you guys. Who has been directed by the California Adult Authority to institute a new Get Out policy in dealing with California's prison population, summed up the Mexican Mafia new family warfare this way. It's a question of power and money by ruthless men who are beyond any hopes of rehabilitation, most of whom have been in crime from the time they were 12 years old. And that concludes that article, ladies and gentlemen. But man, that's a
pretty good article, actually.
I love them stories from way back then, bro.
You know, that's the reason when I found this article, I'm like 1973. I go, how often do you find an article that talked about 1973 from a reporter standpoint? Let alone the New York Times, who is one of probably the biggest publication newspaper that there is in the United States, let alone probably the world.
Oh, it is. The New York Times was back when newspapers were popular, newspapers aren't really popular no more because everybody gets it digitally. You know what I mean? But the New York Times was number one. The LA Times was probably number two. And then you had all them other ones on the East Coast. The Chicago Tribune, you know what I mean? But all the East Coast especially, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you already know that they put their time and effort and resources and researched this article because they used wardens from like Soledad and officers in LA County Jail. So at this time, this is as in-depth an article you can get from a reporter from the time of 1973 that talks about the origins of the Nuestra Familia, which there's one thing that I found kind of interesting, right? And anybody that's ever heard me do the spill on the MA's history or NF history is I've always referred to the MA in the beginning I've always said this, and you don't hear this on too many other people's pages, right? But I said it was at one time originally called El Mexicano Encarcelado. Mm-hmm. This article kind of clarifies that. So from their research, they were able to get the same information. That information was passed on to me when I was taught by C's up in Corcoran Shoe a little bit more in depth about the history. They gave me a whole separate history for me to review for myself. They talked about them being called El Mexicano Encarcelado. Now, what's interesting, right, is this is talked about 6 months after Cheyenne's death. You know what I'm saying? So within that 72 to 73 period, we discussed a lot of these murders in the Joe Pele Morgan thing, as well as the Cheyenne thing about the tick-for-tack murders that were happening before his death and then afterwards. So 34 murders, at least half were attributed to both these particular groups, man. This is what eventually led to them being slammed down and isolated from the rest of the groups, which called for measures for each of these groups to employ undercovers, sleepers. These are the type of terms that you would hear back then at that time era, man. And that incident that they talked about at the beginning, the Soledad, about the movie, I think that was talked about in Fig's book, The Last General Standing, if I'm not mistaken. You know, what did you find interesting about this article, Rojo?
Man, just the main thing that jumped out at me, really, I mean, it's kind of not even toward the subject, but that there was only 12 prisons back then. There was only,
21,000.
21,000 inmates or whatever. And it's like, man, and they glorify and intensify things of this nature to be able to get the funding to build new prisons. You know what I mean? All these
Yeah.
propositions over the years that have made offenses in the 70s or 80s you would never go to prison for, bro. They made it 16, 2, and 3. Those are them 16, 2, and 3s. And that's what drove down the convicts, man. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to say quality of the inmates because there's nothing to glorify or say this is how a gangster is supposed to act. That's not what we're talking about, man. So it's just, man, how many prisons is there now? 34?
34? How many? What's the population? Like 120,000, 150,000?
No, man,
Something
and
like
it
that?
was up to like 180 or something like that for a while. They were locking up
Imagine
people for everything.
Can you imagine if you took today's time period, right? And say 180,000 inmates, and you broke it down to, let's just say 40,000, and you spread them all out to all the prisons, the most worst of the worst of how a prison used to be,
Yeah.
when you only had 12 operating prisons. This is what people talk about, the old convict style mentality that they used to have, how dangerous it was. You know what I mean? Now you're throwing in kids who have some residential burglaries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They get stuck on some Percocets or some oxys, right? And they run around, start doing crimes. They're not built for this lifestyle. Next thing you know, they're looking at a 5-8 year term. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't, there was people going to prison at one time for dope possessions. Let's not forget about that.
Mhm.
For having a quarter gram of a substance, you were catching 16, 2, and 3 at one point, going to prison. If you had a strike, they were doubling it up, man.
And you're just a knock, bro. You have nothing to do with no G life. You're not about that action. You're just a knock.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, bro.
No, I agree. That's the one thing that kind of stuck out for me. And as well as that individual, Buckley, that they talk about, that was of Chicano descent, but had like a white name.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that individual's name, ever. And the other thing is that they said it was that the MA, right, was only allowing membership for only Mexican American inmates, which was true at one time. I think the change in that rule came based upon Joe Pegleg Morgan. Now,
You thinking of letting him in? He's
yeah,
not Mexican.
it's my understanding that he got recruited, I think, right after the initial shoe war. I don't think he was a mafioso at that time, but I think he was a strong associate for years.
Yeah, he was around for sure. Yeah,
he was definitely around, man. And the thing that's kind of interesting, right, is the terminology. You know what I mean? Mafioso, right? We just had an old timer on the other day. The Dr. De La Cruz, much respect to, and he referred to them as mafiosos too. So the language, the lingo, the stilo, all that, it all matches up to what we're hearing from old timers.
right.
You know what I'm saying? I never heard the new family theory though. You know what I'm saying?
No, I'm not ignoring you, bro. I'm trying to look up something that's related to this that I have saved somewhere and I can't find it.
What was it?
Anyway, it's as far as being either group being limited to Latin or Mexican, whatever kind of blood, man. As far as our former group, man, it was membership was open to those of the Latin extraction. This is I can't do it word for word, but other races will be considered, you know what I'm saying, and require votes, you know what I mean, just like anybody else.
Yeah,
so I mean, it is.
Say that. I've seen the old Constitution. There were some requirements that were made.
I had to actually break that part down extra specially, probably because I'm not Mexican, you know what I mean. So Tibbs was like, "Hey, how do you feel about this? Does that sound weird to you?" And I'm like, "No, I mean, if 90-something% of members are, there's no problem with it, man. You know what I mean?" So I said, "No, I mean, it's not racist, bro. I mean, everybody's been in there, and a lot of people seem to think that, it was only Mexicans, man. But dude, some of the biggest players in history weren't even Mexican, Bobo or Black Bob, or you know what I mean? Dancing Bear, Corny, you know what I'm saying? KC, I mean, Sundown's half, but a lot of the major name people, it was never about that, bro. They let in anybody who handled their business, bro. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people ask me all the time, like, how'd you feel being an outsider? I'm not an outsider. I'm a homeboy, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're an outsider. You know what I mean? I never
Yeah.
felt weird, you know?
It's the other thing that I caught on this too, man, is if you think about it, the MA and the NF, the MA started to hit the streets a little bit faster. I want to say around 1970 is when they started to get proactive. They infiltrated some drug rehab organizations out there, some nonprofits and stuff like that. And I think their first, actually, the hits that started happening on the streets were around 72 and 73. Both these prison groups got active and took their crime syndicates, as they call them, to the streets.
I got a question for you, Flacco. What was the year that you heard in when you learned your history that them gentlemen from down the way actually started? I heard 1955. Other people say 57. What'd you hear?
I've heard 55 and 57. The thing is, okay, the history I got from actually that, you know what I mean? I got some special history one time when I was there that no Norteño or no NR members were getting. And I got the 1955. I got the El Mexicano Encarcelado portion of it. I got a whole different history that you don't hear that the NR and Norteños don't get. You know what I mean? Because they specifically gave it to me. A lot of that had to do with me prone to the streets. You know what I'm saying? And ready to function. And this is at that time, that's the early stages of when they're already potentially looking at you as NF candidates. Therefore, you're going to be privileged to different information. So I was privileged to a little bit more information than other people. And that was the history that I got.
Likewise.
As well as the NF was actually started off around 1965.
Likewise.
That's maybe 64. But it started off as small skirmishes, blooming flower, different. They took under different titles. You know what I mean? The Familia Cinco, that's something that allegedly Black Bob said was created in the beginning. But I've seen documentation of 1974 from Dave Corona of writing a letter signing that Familia Cinco, and it talks about how the MA and NF were displeased because they didn't want to take no position. I also have, it's on the members only page, I have a little notification that talks about everybody who was a member of Familia Cinco, NF, and MA members. And it doesn't add up to what Black Bob said. You know what I mean? A lot of those memoirs that came from, as far as the Familia Cinco being part of the NF, a lot of that came from Black Bob, because when the split happened between the NF around 1980, 81, right? And Black Bob came out on top. He had a lot to do with the Norteño movement as well. You know what I'm saying? He was one of those ones that put everybody in position. So a lot of those educationals that came from us came from him. A lot of the different indoctrination. That's why you're going to have sometimes when we have these old timers like Sundown or, you know, other people who sided with Bible and Fig, they're going to have a whole different perspective of how the history played out, as opposed to those like Tibbs and Bo and all them and Black Bob, who were on that side of the fence.
Right.
So they're all going to have a different perspective of really what happened. So it's like, you got to take everything with a grain of salt that, you know, we weren't present. It's the same thing with crackers. You're going to hear old timers like Tibbs and all them who were present when the split happened, when everything happened with Sammy Venegas and what happened with crackers. But you're also going to hear crackers and other bulldogs talk about this is what happened.
Right.
We weren't there. It depends on what side that came out on top. And
everybody has a different experience, so they're going to have a different viewpoint. Yeah.
These men at that time, they were treacherous. You know what I'm saying? Not only they were convicts, I mean, they were doing things like that. They were involved in activities that if they were doing those today, they'd be deemed no good. Yeah. From the youngsters that we talked about, man, they were taking them and selling them and doing whatever. Both sides were doing that stuff, man. Yeah. If anybody thinks that wasn't happening, man, come on, man. We already know fucking old man Rafas was the number one. What do you call him? He loved them cheeks, right?
He was a hunter. He was a hunter-gatherer.
Man, he was a booty bandit. Now, I mean, that's just the way the life was back then, man. You know, so you're dealing with a different time era when you had real convicts were convicts. They were criminals. They were vicious. You had to be ferocious. Yeah. Dog eat, dog world. And when it's like any atmosphere you live in. It's like if they were in prison in today's society, they would not be able to exist. But during that time era, that's how it was. People were getting punked. They were getting extorted. They were getting their stuff took. And if you didn't want to align with one of these groups, you were going to suffer the consequences. You know what I'm saying? And that's where everything changed. Like someone was asking me the other day, you know, what's his name talked about the North-South split. He believed kind of started in 73. I think I don't think it officially started till later. I think there were incidents like that that continue to escalate. I think the North or South thing was never really technically planned. I think it took fold and it grew on its own, and neither side expected that to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but
it does, because it doesn't really make sense to limit yourself geographically, you know, for
No.
either group. You know, of course, like we've talked about, the group down there next to that wall has a little bit of an advantage, but for them to, or either side to limit their recruiting pool to geography, it's not financially sound, man. So I agree with you that it just sort of transpired, you know, on a naturally, you know.
I mean, can you imagine how many wars were taking place on the street that we don't know about back then? Because they were fighting for regiments. I mean, they were out there in San Diego. They were out there in Chino. They were out there in Chiques.
Yeah.
They were out there in Bakersfield, Fresno. You know what I mean? They were out there. There was regiments in those areas. I was told in our history, you know what I mean? The one I got from the Cardenales that was separate from the Norteño history, right? That what the NR got said that at one time, one of our strongest chapters, just remember, they didn't always call them regiments. They also called them chapters back then. One of the strongest chapters at one time was San Diego, believe it or not. You know what I mean? As well as Santa Barbara, you know what I mean? But San Diego was actually a stronghold one time. And so at that time, it was a different time era. So they would be employed. There'd be one or two familiano in this area, and then they would try to recruit local gangs in those areas, a la the Chino Sinners. That's how that situation arose. You know, we hear a lot about them. I'm waiting. I'm almost going to get someone who was affiliated with the Chino Sinners back then that may be coming on this channel soon. That's going to be able to break it down for us, man. So, you know, we weren't present. We just know I could name about there's literally about like at least 20 members that were potentially Chino Sinners at one time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As well as there was potentially 10 members that were from Chiques. You know what I mean?
Chiques.
Santa Barbara. There was also a bunch from Santa Barbara. We may be having one from Santa Barbara on as well pretty soon. So we're working on things, and this is the only way we're going to be able to get the real information out there for the listeners to understand what truly happened. Part of this channel is about educating everybody. It's about information, but it's also about curtailing people from making these choices. You know what I'm saying? From living that gang lifestyle. And if we can understand where we came from in the beginning, how all this arose, maybe we can figure out ways to how we can stop it.
That's the goal, man. Our goal, you know, sometimes it gets twisted. We're talking about things and it seems like we're glamorizing it. You can't take away history. You can't take away the things that either myself, Flacco, Gunner, Boxer, Biggie, any of our homies have been through. You know what I mean? It's in no way glamorizing it, because you see where we all sit now, and there's a reason. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not a lifestyle that leads to greatness, man. It leads to the most horrible things that life can lead to, death and incarceration. So keep that in mind. If you think we're glamorizing, no, we're speaking factual, historical things and honest perspectives from our point of view, because we've been there, we've been around these people, we participated in these activities, and we in no way encourage others to do that, because you're not going to be happy at the end of the day with the choice you made. And that goes for 99 point something percent of anybody who gets involved with these groups. I promise you, the B&L list on both groups is way, way longer than the GNL. You know what I'm saying? So keep that in mind, man. It seems like we have fun and we talk smack, but there's a purpose for it, man. And those of you who are intelligent enough to see it, we appreciate you.
Hey, Ro, let's look at these statistics. Let's look at anybody from the early 70s and 80s, right? Anybody there at 73 in the early 80s. I guarantee you, 95% of them are not active anymore.
95? More than that. You got DC, you got DC, you got Pinky, you got Corny, later 70s.
I'm talking about the 80s as well, though, bro.
They're gone.
You know what I mean?
From my time, they're gone.
Exactly. I'm talking about.
And they're not gone because they're weak. They're not gone because they're soft. They're not gone for none of them reasons. I promise.
What you think? You think 98% maybe?
Everybody knows, bro. Even the people who don't like it, they know deep down inside. It's
find an active OG that's over 50.
It's a 10-year career, you guys, and it leads to death, prison, or the B&M. That's the only three places you're going for any group, any of the big three. Period. Anyway, YouTube, man, we found this article to be great. I love these old interviews. I'm sure y'all do too. Those of you guys who have any kind of information about any of that stuff from the past, please feel free to share if you know anything that we haven't covered, because we're here for you guys. You know what I mean? We want to provide what you guys want to hear. So shoot us them stories, man. A convict's perspective at on Instagram, man. DM me, shoot me anything you want. Flacco's open for anything you guys want to share at all times, man. We're here for you guys.
You know what, man? Also, that correctional officer that the situation happened to, man, his father reached out to us in the comments, man. Get at us on our IG, man. I'll let the comment for you to get at either one of us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your story.
I've seen that as well. Yeah, that'd be cool to hear, you know, from a family perspective. But have a good day, YouTube, man. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. And hopefully you guys have a good week. Monday Night Football tonight, Raiders and Ravens. Check it out.
Lamar Jackson's gonna run all over them fucking Raiders. Watch.
He's gonna end up getting hurt, bro. All his talent is injured right now. He keeps running that ball like that. Mark my words, bro. It's gonna be rough for him. Look at the injuries on the Ravens.
I gotta check that out, man.
It does not look good. I'm not saying the Raiders are gonna knock him out, because the Raiders aren't very good. You know, even though that's my team, I'm gonna keep it 100. But if he keeps running the ball and his weapons are gone, eventually he's gonna, man, Achilles, ACL, MCL, meniscus, hip dysplasia. He's gonna get cracked, bro. You can't run like that as a quarterback. My opinion. Anyway.
He got 3 more years. He's out.
Have a good one, YouTube, man. We'll holler at you later.